All right, so if you are anything like me, recently you may be feeling just like heavy energies and weird energies. And of course, like everything that's going on in the news and all of that, it's just chaos. So what is going on and what could be the solution? I'm not saying that I have the answer, but I do want to give you something to consider. And I would say that with everything going on, it is time to consider the spiritual underpinnings of what's going on, and do not stop watching this just because I said spirit. Unfortunately, our society has become so materialistic and reductionist in that religions think that spirit and supernatural things are evil, and then science just leaves out spirit altogether. And some people are just agnostic, atheists, and some people, like me, I grew up in church and I had this sort of thing against it. I didn't believe what they were teaching me until I went through a lot of pain and then developed my own sort of spiritual understanding. So listen though, spirituality, it is not just a way to heal. It's not just a way to overcome pain and trauma. It is not just a way to get closer to God. Spirituality, the energetic world, is a science. The energetic world informs and creates the material world, the spiritual energetic world. So listen to this really quick, because I think it's so important at this time more than ever to ask, who am I? Who am I? And to step into your power and not let people tell you who you are or what is possible for you. And listen to this, okay? So there is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the electromagnetic wave spectrum, but everything really is. Whenever, the way that I mean spirituality is a science, it's the science of the frequency of vibrations. And so listen to this. I know that it can seem just like woo-woo or whatever, okay? But really, if you know what the electromagnetic spectrum is, what the human eye can actually perceive is only like 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. We see the visible light spectrum. Our eyes do, but we have other senses, of course. But our eyes only see 1% of these electromagnetic waves, and electromagnetic waves are what informs the material world. And if you can imagine, okay, so like whenever there's waves, there's certain frequencies, and a frequency is how, and listen to this, whether you like listen, even if it kind of goes over your head, the problem that people have right now is that we're not self-educating basically, and we're ignoring things. But listen, so the frequency of how often something happens, and then wavelengths are going to be inversely proportional to frequency. So frequency is how often something happens, but the lower the frequency, the longer the wavelength. And so we only perceive things in this visible light spectrum that has this frequency and wavelength, and it's between 750 nanometers of a wavelength to 400, very small, what we actually see with our eyes. So what else is going on? And so at the larger wavelengths are going to be radio waves, TV waves, microwaves, and then you move into infrared, and then you go into ultraviolet and X-rays as it gets more and more frequency, and the wavelength gets smaller. And so the reason that I'm saying this is because these electromagnetic waves are going on right now, and they affect our bodies because our bodies are basically cells and atoms that have electrons and protons and neutrons that are affected by electromagnetic energy. And so the awesome thing about this is that we have power to create our lives. Like Nikola Tesla, if you look at that physicist, he says we are the receivers and the broadcasters. Think about that and look into it. Ask, who am I? And how can we affect, like if what we see is less than 1% of reality, what are we missing, and how can we change? And how can asking more questions like who am I and what's really going on help us get into a new level of consciousness? Like Albert Einstein said, I meant to say this at the beginning, but he said we can't solve a problem on the same level of consciousness that created it. It's a new level of consciousness and understanding of who you really are, and how it's not just this physical body and what we see. There is an electromagnetic wave spectrum that's affecting who we are, how we think. The waves, the TV waves, the radio waves affect our thoughts and emotions. Our emotions are just biochemical reactions that happen in our body. And they are brought about by the thoughts that we have and the meaning that we give things. And that can be affected by electromagnetic energy. So it's very important to understand how we can be manipulated by electromagnetic energy, but then also how we have more power than technology right now. Like if you can even fathom that. And there's people like Nikola Tesla, who was a physicist, who showed that there are such things as alternating energy currencies where we can tap into the ionosphere of the earth and get energy without having to pay companies for gas and oil and electricity that's a direct current. So it's very interesting. If you just do self-education, ask, who am I? Ask what is really going on and look into that. And right now, develop your self-worth, develop your self-love, because whenever you love yourself and you see your own worth, you can then see that in others, and we do treat each other more nicely that way. So ask who you are and consider the fact that we can't solve these problems on the same level of consciousness that created it. It's going to happen over and over again. If you're not taking into account the spiritual world, then you're not really seeing reality, and nothing will change.